Your pulse just quickened, your body tensed up, you may have even felt a shiver down your spine. But why? Why do horror movies make your heart pound, your palms sweat, and your mind race, even when you know it's just a movie? It's not just the monsters, the ghosts, or the masked killers. It's something far more powerful: psychological manipulation. Horror movies hack into the deepest parts of your brain using hidden tactics to trigger fear without you even realizing it. And once you see how they do it, horror movies may never scare you the same way again. Stay with me, because I'm going to reveal the ultimate fear tactic horror movies use to mess with your mind at the end. Let's begin. The science of fear, how your brain reacts. Horror movies aren't just entertainment. They're designed to activate the most primal parts of your brain. The amygdala, your brain's fear center, is responsible for detecting threats and triggering fight or flight mode. When you watch a horror movie, your amygdala can't always tell the difference between fiction and reality. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, and your breathing gets shallower. All the same reactions as if you were actually in danger. But here's the paradox: we enjoy it. But why? Psychologists call this the excitation transfer theory. When we experience intense fear, our body floods with adrenaline and dopamine. The same chemicals that trigger terror also make us feel alive and exhilarated. That's why horror fans keep coming back for more. It's also a safe way to experience danger. Our brains get the thrill without the real-life consequences. Think of it as a roller coaster for your emotions. You feel the rush, but deep down you know you're safe. And horror movies don't stop at triggering fear. They go deeper, tapping into something even more unsettling: the uncanny valley, why imperfect humans scare us. Now, let's talk about something even creepier: the uncanny valley. You felt it before. That unsettling feeling when you look at a doll, a mannequin, or a robot that looks almost but not quite human. Your brain rejects it. It's wrong. It's unnatural. This is why horror movies use dolls, Annabelle, haunted paintings, human-like ghosts, and masked killers. They exploit our discomfort with things that are almost human, but just off enough to feel disturbing. Why does this happen? Our brains are wired to read human faces for emotions and trust signals. When something looks human but lacks lifelike details, like emotionless eyes, stiff movements, or unnatural expressions, our brains panic. It triggers an evolutionary response. This might be a threat. This is why Megan, 2023, is so disturbing. She's a humanoid AI doll designed to look realistic, but her movements are too smooth, her expressions too perfect. She doesn't blink enough. Her facial muscles don't move quite right. It's like our brains are screaming, something is wrong. Horror movies use this effect to their advantage. From the nun's distorted face to its eerie smile, filmmakers know that what looks human but isn't quite human enough is far scarier than any monster. And horror movies don't stop there. They also manipulate sound, silence, and music to mess with your mind even further. The sound of fear, how music and silence manipulate you. Horror movies don't just scare you with what you see, they manipulate what you hear. Sound is one of the most powerful psychological weapons in horror, and filmmakers use it to trigger fear without you even realizing it. 1. Infrasound, the fear you can't hear. Ever felt uneasy watching a horror movie, even when nothing scary is happening? That might be infrasound at work. Infrasound refers to low-frequency sounds below 20 Hz, too low for the human ear to fully hear, but powerful enough to trigger anxiety, dizziness, and even a sense of dread. Movies like Paranormal Activity and Insidious use infrasound to create a sense of unseen danger. Your brain perceives something is wrong even though you can't consciously identify what it is. Some scientists even believe natural infrasound from earthquakes or wind could be the reason for ghost sightings. 2. Dissonance and screeching violins, the music of terror. Ever noticed how horror music sounds unnatural, high-pitched, and chaotic? That's because composers deliberately use dissonance, clashing notes that your brain associates with distress. Think about the shrill, stabbing violin in Psycho's shower scene, or the slow, creeping two-note theme in Jaws. These sounds mimic the distress cries of animals in danger, triggering primal fear responses in humans. Your brain hears it and instantly associates it with pain, fear, or a threat nearby. 3. The power of silence, when your brain fills the gaps. Sometimes the scariest sound is no sound at all. Horror movies use sudden silence before a scare to make you feel vulnerable and exposed. When everything goes quiet, your brain goes into high alert. It expects something to happen. This trick is used in movies like A Quiet Place, where silence itself is a weapon, forcing you to listen for the terror lurking in the shadows. Even worse, when the scare doesn't come right away, filmmakers sometimes fake you out, holding the silence just a little longer than expected, making your anticipation unbearable. Then, bam, the scare lands when you least expect it. This combination of infrasound, dissonance, and silence ensures horror movies don't just scare you on screen, they burrow into your subconscious. But sound is only half the story. Darkness and shadow play, your brain fills in the horror. Horror movies love darkness, not just because it hides the monster, but because it forces your brain to invent the terror itself. 1. Fear of the unknown, how darkness traps your mind. Your brain is wired to fear what it can't see. In complete darkness, it starts filling in the blanks, assuming the worst. This is why The Babadook and It Follows work so well. The threat is often unseen, lurking in the dark, leaving your imagination to run wild. Psychologists call this perceptual completion, when the brain fills in missing details based on past fears. Horror movies exploit this by leaving just enough to the imagination, making the terror feel personal to each viewer. 2. Shadow psychology, why what you don't see is scarier. Sometimes, not showing the monster is more terrifying than revealing it. Movies like Jaws and The Blair Witch Project prove that the scariest horror is what your brain imagines. Steven Spielberg originally planned to show the shark in Jaws much earlier, but due to technical issues, he had to hide it for most of the movie. The result? A much scarier experience because the fear of the unseen shark was far worse than any CGI creature. By keeping the monster in the shadows, horror movies force your brain to create its own nightmare, and often, what you imagine is far worse than reality. 3. Subliminal fear triggers hidden horror in plain sight. Some horror films go even deeper, using subliminal imagery to mess with your subconscious. For example, in The Exorcist, brief demon faces flash on screen for less than a second. You might not consciously notice them, but your subconscious picks them up, leaving you uneasy without knowing why. This technique, called fear priming, plants a sense of dread before the real scares hit. It's also used in The Ring, where distorted images and eerie flashes make you feel unsettled without a clear reason. Psychological manipulation, how horror movies control your mind. Horror movies aren't just scary because of what's on screen. They're designed to control your emotions, trick your instincts, and make fear feel inescapable. From jump scares to suspenseful buildups, filmmakers know exactly how to keep you on edge. 1. Jump scare science, how your brain predicts fear. Jump scares are the most infamous tool in horror, but they work because of how your brain anticipates fear. When you watch a horror movie, your brain constantly scans for danger, preparing your body for a scare. But when a harmless fake-out, like a cat jumping out or a door creaking, happens first, your brain relaxes. And that's when the real scare hits even harder. Movies like Insidious and The Conjuring use this technique masterfully, throwing false alarms at you so you let your guard down, then striking when you least expect it. 2. Suspense versus surprise. The agony of waiting. Jump scares are effective, but sometimes the waiting is worse than the scare itself. Movies like Hereditary and The Witch build fear slowly, making you dread what's coming instead of shocking you instantly. This is because of a psychological effect called tension anticipation. When your brain expects something bad, but it doesn't happen yet. You sit there gripping your seat, waiting for the horror to hit, and that feeling of dread can be far worse than the scare itself. 3. Mirror neurons and empathy, why you feel the pain. Ever noticed how you flinch, hold your breath, or even feel pain when something terrible happens to a horror movie character? That's because of mirror neurons, the part of your brain that feels what others feel. Horror movies exploit this by showing prolonged suffering, like in A Nightmare on Elm Street, where Freddy draws out his victims' deaths. Your brain reacts as if it's happening to you, making the fear more personal and inescapable. All of this, jump scares, suspense, and emotional manipulation, turns horror movies into psychological traps. But what if the horror didn't end when the movie did? The ultimate fear tactic, breaking the fourth wall. Some horror movies don't just scare you, they make you a part of the horror. 1. Why found footage horror works. Movies like The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity feel real because they use found footage style, shaky cameras, amateur acting, and minimal effects. This makes your brain blur the line between fiction and reality, making the fear feel personal. 2. When horror comes home. Then there are movies like The Ring and Sinister, which break the fourth wall, suggesting that just watching the movie puts you in danger. Suddenly, you're not just an observer, you're a target. 3. The scariest truth. And this leads to the ultimate fear tactic, the thought that maybe the horror isn't just on screen. What if the real terror isn't in movies, but in your own mind? Now that you know how horror movies manipulate your brain, will they still scare you? Or will you start to notice the tricks, the fake-outs, the psychological mind games, the eerie sound cues before they happen? Let me know in the comments, what's the scariest horror movie you've ever seen? And if you loved this breakdown, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden psychology behind your favorite films. Thanks for watching and sweet dreams.